lecture, the Chancellor's lecture series in 2016, about climate change, which is an incredibly important issue. We don't really take the Indigenous view of the climate really very seriously, as is, we had an international forum in December in Paris, France. All the leaders of the world came together to talk about climate change, and Indigenous people were ignored. And that's why I think it's important that we have voices like George here to talk to us. Not just because he studies climate change, but he's actually on the front line of climate change. So there's no one more important. We tend to, as a culture, romanticize and historicize the Indigenous knowledge of the land, but we never really talk about it in terms of science. And that's why I'm so grateful we agreed to do this. Now, George got his PhD in 2006 from the University of Montana, where he still teaches in Native American Studies and African American Studies. He got 30 years teaching experience, and he's still going. God bless him for that. Several articles published in leading journals and book publications, but also in relation to climate change, what you're going to be talking about today. He lives with his wife, Barbara, for 42 years, and their son, Noah, on a 5-acre permaculture farm on the Flathead Reservation. He has an interesting line of descent, as you said yourself. Asnoa, Wampanoag, Massachusetts, Choctaw, African, French, and Scottish. There's a lot of ethnicities in them. He's been exploring human identity issues for most of his life, personally and professionally. But since 2012, his focus has been on protecting Mother Earth, all species therein above all of their interest. He serves as an environmental issues coordinator for Indian Peoples Action, which is a group based here in Montana. For the last 2 years, he's worked with the IPA and several other allied activist organizations in blocking the movement of mega-sized oil equipment transport through Missoula and several other actions of resistance to protect Earth from destruction. He's got a blog called Learning Earthwords, which focuses on creating alternatives as well as linking information to many positive groups and sources of information of what we can do to protect and renew life on Earth. So, without any more introduction, I'd like to present Dr. George Press.
Thank you, Paul. Kutapatush, thank you in our Wampanoag language, and to the Chancellor's Lecture Committee, I'd like to say Kutapatush too. Thank you. To everybody here, what a great crowd. Good to see you all. I say Waniuk, which in Wampanoag means be well and live in balance. Balance, the key to health and total health of the 4 aspects of being. Well, that's about all I need my notes for. Okay. Refer to a couple of names a little later. I'd like to start out with some humor here. I realize that a lot of folks, this might be kind of an inside joke. You might not quite get it. I hope and expect by the end of this lecture, this will make some sense to you. And we'll be in about 3 parts. I got a lot of images in this lecture, and I'll be talking about first a historical overview of Indigenous climate activism, or activism for the earth, in different aspects. I can't talk about everything, right? But mostly the I Don't Know More movement. So I'll be doing the history of the last 3 1/4 years for most of this time. And then we look at Indigenous sustainable lifeways and what was actually the norm for 97.5% of our existence as a species, Homo sapiens sapiens, which leads into the final 3rd part which is, what do we do about all this? What actions can we take in our lives to protect life on Earth? And one that I'll be talking about in more detail is permaculture, or living with the Earth, cultivating with the Earth and not against it. And I'll explain all that later. And so, glad you're here. Welcome, everybody. Now, first, I want to say something I'm not going to get in an argument or discussion about, and that's, is climate change real? I think I'll let the scientists speak to that point, and I, am a historian. I've been reading a lot of science, last 5 or 6 years especially, but I can give you links and references to the real experts. 99% or more of them now probably agree that this is not only real, but human activity has a heck of a lot to do with the rapid increase in warming. So this is from 2014. Everywhere you see a red spot is a record high temperatures, as long as they've been keeping track of temperatures in these regions. And this year, or this last year, 2015, is hotter than 2014. And that's all I'm going to say about that. So I got a lot to cover about activism. And I'll just say man-made or human cause for the most part. It coincides with, as you see there, oh, I got a little one of these. Yeah, 1880, the ascendancy of rapid technological industrialization, and in a time where for a good while they've been pillaging the earth and putting deep wounds in the mother with the mining and the deforestation and all of that leading up to this, and then the internal combustion engine and everything just started to skyrocket. And again, I'll say, I send you to the scientist if you don't want to accept it. It's not my topic tonight. It's the basis for everything else. And all the activism you are about to see. So I sense I'm going to start, mainly with 2012. I just want to fill in a little bit up to then. And I say that anybody who's living with the earth and in harmony with the earth and with the earth systems and in respect to Mother and all the spirits is, in some degree, a climate activist, or a person who's resisting the trends that I showed you on those two graphs. So it's a matter of how do you do enough activism. Everybody who's trying to live harmoniously is doing some, but what do we do to do enough? And so most indigenous activism was just in the way that people lived traditionally, in a respectful, harmonious relationship. And this is worldwide, all indigenous peoples. And all the humans originally were indigenous peoples worldwide and lived in respect with the living systems of the earth. So that is what changed, and I'll be showing you some of that and how that happened. How did that change? Why did it stop? And in more recent times, tribal activism has been for homeland or reservation, treaty rights, sovereignty, protecting what remains out of all that was stolen, all that was taken. That's a reservation is reserved from this vast majority of the lands that were taken. And so activism, for the most part, up until the last couple of decades has been more local, tribally specific. But now we're seeing a interconnected indigenous worldwide movement for the same issue that I'm about to talk about in the last several years. So my first example is from the reservation where I live. I lived for the last 30 and a half years with the Salish and Kootenai people on the Flathead Reservation, where I began my teaching career. And in 1982, after the good hard work of Bearhead Sweeney, David Rockwell, and working with federal officials, they established the first and, as far as I know, the only tribally and federally designated wilderness area. By the initiative of the tribes, they joined an area at the east end of their reservation, the Flathead Reservation, with the Mission Mountains wilderness area that had been established in 1976 by the federal government. So they decided to expand that federal wilderness area into the tribal reservation lands. And so this is some of that land there. Beautiful, beautiful place. I imagine some of you have visited Flathead Res. Yep. Maybe even went to SKC. Huh? I used to teach there a long time ago. And here's that same wilderness, the northern part of it, as you can see from the hills behind my house or farm there. And I got a blank page. So next topic, kind of bridging the space between the 1980s and 2012. And, you know, I don't think anybody can make the claim, I'm the first indigenous climate activist, but I think Winona LaDuke would come pretty close to it, you know, as a person who consciously focused on that issue when a lot of people were focusing on many other environmental issues in Indian country. And going back to, she began her activism career, there she is when she's pretty young, in her 20s in the 1980s. And that's still one of her most famous quotes, and I just thought I'd put that up there for you. I guess you all read it by now, I have to read it out loud. Okay. And then there's something more recent, and I just wanted to acknowledge the great work she's done in her organization. Honor the Earth is a good one to get in touch with. Then, a little while after she started, and this is something that's been going on all around the world. Different indigenous communities around the world were seeing the same thing. Glaciers melting, wetlands drying up. Of course, they've been seeing deforestation from the industrialists and all of that. But way up in the northern end of Colombia, up in the Sierra Santa Marta Mountains, live the Kogi people. And they managed to keep their culture and lifeways intact by fleeing up into the highest elevations when the conquistadores were there in the late 1500s and early 1600s, sometime in there. They left their lower elevation villages and went way up into the rugged high country and continued their way of life. You know, every now and then they come down the mountains and pass through the nearby little city, little town, on their way to the ocean, because part of their medicine comes from certain shells on the ocean. It's a very interesting medicine that the men take to balance out their masculinity so that they're not too macho. and jerk-like. Is that a word, jerk-like? And it's an old tradition that they still do. So to get to the shells, they have to leave, it's about 25 miles, and they walk and go get these shells. So anyway, long story short, got too many stories, but anyway, they pass through the town. Every now and then they just look at the humans of this other crazy world and go into their stores and look at a TV on display. And somehow they found out about the BBC in England, probably watching a Spanish language broadcast at the BBC, a nature documentary. And they said, okay, that's the person who's going to take our message to the world. And their medicine people and visionaries, after watching the glaciers melt up where they live, had a vision that this is a worldwide problem, it's not local, and that this message, we're the elder brothers and we need to teach the younger brothers of the world what they're doing to the world is basically unsustainable, that it has to stop. And so they got a guy from the BBC to do a documentary on them. About 1988, they got in touch with him. The documentary came out about 1990. It's called From the Heart of the World, the Elder Brothers Warning. I don't know how widely it's been distributed. Has anybody heard of that one? Yeah, see, and that's probably why it's taken so long to get the message. But it didn't really get a lot of press or coverage or anything like that. But mostly in environmentalist circles, people heard about this. And so that happened then, and other people, the Yanomami people in the Amazon and other people started getting contacts and sending out the messages that your way of living is going to destroy everybody, all species, not just humans. And so you had Aborigine or Indigenous people of Australia coming out with the same message from the north, where they were more in their traditional ways. And so that kind of thing happened. And at the same time, James Hansen, about 1988, right around the same time, the NASA scientist who first published scientific material on man-caused global warming, he began publishing. A lot of people started to be aware of it, but it's been a slow process until about the last 5 to 10 years of getting most people in the world aware, partly because ExxonMobil and other people had scientists who knew about this too, and they decided to suppress the science and dismiss and slander scientists who were telling these stories and publishing it. And so we had a long battle with what's commonly called the deniers too. But now we've come to some point here where we've come to a tipping point of acceptance of this science, and the majority of people, especially in the world, still not sure about the USA, but the rest of the world has pretty much accepted the science on this. Okay, now we're at 2012, and I got to go quick. I'm going to need some time checks, I need to know when I'm 20 minutes in, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and then I'm supposed to be done about 40 or 45 minutes. That's what I was told, but I'm a rascal about that kind of thing. But if you guys give me some clues.
10 minutes left.
Yeah, okay, thanks. You've heard of this, haven't you? Okay, I bet a lot of you. Some of you might have been involved in a few rallies or actions regarding this. Fall of 2012, up in Canada, 4 women, 3 Indigenous, 1 non-Indigenous woman, after witnessing rapid violations accumulating against native lands and what did you say?
Stephen Harper.
Harper, yes, yes. Thanks for the help there. Your sympathy with an old man. Forget names. Names I was just telling myself a half hour ago.
Oh, we just got a new one.
Oh, yeah, so that's where we're going, you know. In this 3¼ years, some incredible changes have happened besides the Prime Minister being replaced by somebody who's much more friendly to the earth and to Indigenous people. And it starts with these gals. I see in laws passed that would allow companies to go into reserves up in Canada and into Indigenous treaty lands and just plunder them for these fossil fuel industries. Also violations of other Native rights and violence against Native women that had been going on for a long time and nobody was doing anything about it. So they decided to try to wake people up and get them kind of off their duffs and acting in the interest of at least their own people. But why not unite all Indigenous people, they thought, and have a intertribal activist movement, and they gave it that name, Idle No More, and began interacting with other activists, first throughout Canada, and then U.S. Activists joined with them, and non-Native activists too. But it was an Indigenous-based movement, Indigenous-founded, environmental and other rights activist movement. And so one of the first types of actions that happened in the late fall and into December of 2012 was the flash mob round dances. Anybody here get to go on one of those? Yeah, all right. Yeah. Got a couple of you. Yeah, you too. And the flash mobs had been a phenomenon in existence before this. You had musicians carry their instruments in a case into a mall, and then on a signal from later, they all burst into a symphony and entertain people in the mall. You had choirs doing that, and some street performers and other activists doing it. So that was a natural media to use at the time, and it worked really well, where drummers and singers and Indigenous people would go to announce a previously announced location and burst into a round dance, you know, with the signs and sometimes with speeches and sometimes not. And so that began. Here's one in Missoula about a month after all this started, a few weeks after, during the Christmas shopping season. And Missoula Mall, you might see a few faces, you know, there. I don't know why Bath and Body Works bag's right in the middle of the circle. I don't know if there's a secret meaning to that. But there it is. No, and so these brothers had started singing, and we danced all around them. And there's me and my grandsons. Oh, don't I look different now, huh? I have to redo my profile picture. Okay, I better speed it up, right? Okay. And so it was a wonderful, empowering event, and from that, many more of these, and got another one with our signs. I should have put that one in there. But there are signs about protecting the waters against the tar sands and all that. I should agree to that. But besides these mob ground dances, or what do you call it, flash mobs, something even more daring and courageous started happening, first all over Canada and then South Dakota and other places against the Keystone, is blockades. And just telling the industrialists, you can't go here. This is our land. In this case, in British Columbia, This was their homeland that had never been ceded to Canada by a treaty. In other words, the Canadian government had never legally or officially taken this land. It's just kind of considered public lands there. And so they were gonna, these pipeline companies were gonna explore for oil development there, and they said, no, you can't do that. And they blockaded, successfully kept them from coming in. Here's another, one of the leaders freed up his son. And I didn't put that title on there, I just found it on Google Images, but that's, she's confronting the RCMP who were trying to prepare the way for these fossil fuel industrialists. And she's saying, no, they're not coming in to our unceded territories to do that dirty business. So this is ongoing. There was a incident in October where a whole massive number of RCMP came into a hotel right nearby there, and word went out, oh, they're going to do a raid on us. And it went all over Facebook and the internet, and then they left. They never did the raid. So something's going on, something powerful. I'm going to tell you about power in a little while, and we'll just keep moving on here. Other activists in British Columbia over similar issues. There's lots of proposed pipelines. They want to take that dangerous substance to the coast and ship it overseas. And the grandmothers and the elder women are at the forefront of many of these activist happenings and groups all over, not only in Canada and the U.S., but way down in South America. Lots of elder women are leading the way. That says something. I'm not going to interpret that for you right now, at least, but there's something very powerful there. Way over on the opposite coast from British Columbia, over in New Brunswick, Canada, just about the same time, communities over there started opposing the fracking that was going on in that area. And the same thing, blockading the streets, saying you're not coming into our community to do that. Just as also at the same time, Pennsylvania, non-native communities telling the frackers, you're not going to do this here anymore. And so, nice image, beautiful. The hand drums are at the center of this too, everywhere, and the songs, and a lot of the powerful songs and prayers. And I think that led to what we've seen in the last 4 months, several victories through these prayers. At that same place, you get one of the more iconic images, and you may have seen this one. You know, it's been on a lot of people's Facebook pages and around the internet, and it's a real powerful image from that same place. I got to move a little quicker. Here's one of the great signs from the early, I don't know, more days, really showing the spirit of that time. And also the Canadian activists holding this sign is inviting the U.S. activists to join them, as you can see with the U.S. flag and the Canadian inside the feathers there. One of my favorite posters from the movement is this one here, kind of another take on the Serenity Prayer. Nothing wrong with prayer, and everybody uses it. But at some point, somebody, like who made this poster, was willing to set aside the quest for serenity for the satisfaction of being able to say, I really made a change in the things that are unacceptable in our world. And I'm doing something to help all life, all species. So, nice poster. Okay, let's keep moving. I know I'm way behind. How am I doing?
30.
Oh, you're kidding. Okay. I'm moving like lightning now. You're gonna see a strobe light slideshow. It's gonna move though, pretty quick here. There we go. Okay, Missoula, Montana, January 2013. The same movement, the same spirit, and I was hoping Charles and Amanda would be here to see this one. But anyway, they made it to the cover of my textbook. Anyway, so they got to see that. Okay. And a lot of young students and people from many tribes who live in and around Missoula coming together for several actions in the last few years. And this is at the top of many of our concerns, and this was one of the focal points of the Idle No More movement in Canada. The tar sands, the largest and most disruptive industrial project with many companies involved in the entire world. Not just the direct destruction of boreal forests, lakes, rivers, but a major disaster for the climate. All the CO2 being released by this, all the trees that naturally would have absorbed CO2 that are just gone. As far as the eye can see, from many vantage points in an area the size of Florida and the size of the United Kingdom. Okay, it's starting to say the British Isles. That's okay. There's a before and after picture of the region. Here's one that kind of looks like a before and after picture. There was actually one photo showing a border line where one company, there's like 26 different fossil fuel companies dividing the spoils in this region. And you can see where one company's projects and one that's been there a lot longer than the ones that are starting on the west side. That's just a border line that dramatically shows before and after. I gotta go fast. Okay, there's the size of it. If you know Alberta and the geography, that's about the size of Florida, the size of the United Kingdom. Oh. And this, one of the things I wanted to talk about, but I'm not going to have too much time, is what they call sacrifice zones in industrial jargon, where, you know we're going to cause some health problems, some destruction of life, but let's put it where it'll do the least harm. For some reason, they decided one of the many of the places that are the least harmful are communities of color, reservations, in Canada reserves, and towns with high populations of marginalized or oppressed people. And this is where a lot of industrial activity of all kinds is always going on, is not, in the suburbs or the ruling class, and those kind of places. I have a story I can tell you about that, and the president of Exxon not wanting fracking in his neighborhood, but I can't tell you that now. Okay, but these are a lot of high indigenous population communities for Chippewayan, very heavily hit, and Fort McKay, right in the middle of this zone. So you can see the reason for indigenous people's concern, especially with your own relatives developing cancers. Cancer rates between 10 to 30 times higher than before the tar sands came in to this region. It varies from community to community. Your proximity to rivers has a lot to do with it, the variation. Also, the continuation of traditional hunting, fishing, and gathering. Some people gave it up when they saw fish like these. Others, stuck with it because it's hard to stop your way of life, Maybe we could just cut those tumors out and eat the rest of the fish, you know. People want to naturally continue in their ways, and so cancer rates and other, and these are rare cancers that are only connected to these chemicals, not the usual cancers that we see in the general population. I'm sorry I don't know all the scientific terminology. I can't direct you to the source for that. Good source on YouTube is called To the Last Drop, Canada's dirty oil, something. Okay, I should. Did I write that down? Actually. Okay. Oh, yes, I did. There it is. To the Last Drop, Canada's dirty oil sands. There's a lot of information on that. This is a heartbreaking film to watch, but it's essential information because you get people testifying in a public hearing about all the relatives that are becoming sick and dying and all of that. So if you want to know more, there you go. Windmills, scary stuff. Okay, that's pretty good. All right, now locally, again, here in Montana, this is another part of the movement and part of the activism. One that I was deeply involved in with Indian People's Action and some of our allies from not only Montana, but Idaho, Washington came over to stop this tar sands productivity equipment from using Montana as a corridor to enhance their business. And so we went out in the streets and went in front of these incredibly large vehicles that are only allowed to travel at night because of the obstruction of the traffic. They couldn't go on the freeways because they were too large to go under the underpasses. And so they would go on highways like this Highway 87 or 93 and others. And so first our relations in the south of us in Idaho, Nez Perce and people blockaded them as they tried to go along the Washoe River on Highway 12. My friend Brooklyn Baptiste there was one of about 4 of them arrested on Highway 12 for trying to block these megalodes. Here's another image showing that right before they got arrested. Ultimately, they succeeded. The truck went through that night, but along with the Forest Service and another federal agency, they got a, there's a word I'm forgetting, but they got a restriction to not allow them to go through there again. And so the companies rerouted. Highway 12 was off limits. And they decided to go way down. Okay, well, I forgot to say where these are coming from. These gigantic rigs. This equipment's manufactured in South Korea, shipped over to Seattle, taken on barges down to Astoria to the Columbia River, down to Columbia, and first they got off at the port of Lewiston to go on Highway 12. Then after that was blocked, they went down to, by the Umatilla Reservation there, to go way down south of Boise, or over by Boise, and then up to Highway 93 and through the Bitterroot Valley into Montana. And that's where we came in. You're not going through Missoula. You know, not so much that we thought we could really stop these rigs, you know, but we needed the people to know what was going on. It was a communication method. And so, oh, there's another one of the Manipu demonstrators. I really like this sign right here. And we don't know what we might be able to do. The future is unwritten. Okay, I'm going to have to go to the next step here, but I'm just going to show you some examples. So in Missoula, we blockaded that. You know, we had to go out at 1 o'clock in the morning, and many of us had to go to work the next morning at 8 or 9 o'clock and wait for these trucks who don't announce exactly when they're going to come. Yeah, you know, and that's how we did it, you know. And so we prepared for this for about a month, December of 2013, and then the first one came through in January. There were about 4 of them. And we were ready for them when they showed up. And what we decided to do was go right out into the road and with drummers and singers and round dance in front of the truck. And why did we do that? In a sense, we were inviting them to get off their trucks and join us in protecting the earth. The round dance is, among other things, a welcoming dance and a unity dance as a social dance. And so that's what we were doing while we were praying for these people to see what they're involved in and what the effects of it are. And so there you are, and there's where we first were coming into the road, and I'm over there. There's another iconic picture, me and my son. And let's see, and then one of our friends, allies in Spokane, brought these lit up signs for us, and that was pretty cool. And we had those over on the side of the road. And then later that year, September, you had the Indigenous Peoples Climate March in New York City. Many thousands of Indigenous people from all over the world joining together. It's just been building up, you know, and getting bigger all along. These images, and then the next year, 2015, late spring, early summer, they had the Cowboy and Indian Alliance out of South Dakota protesting the Keystone XL pipeline. Went all the way to Washington, D.C., and as you know, in early November, Obama blocked that additional pipeline. There's many other pipelines, and there's one that at least is temporarily halted. And as you can see in this picture, there's many other pipelines. There's Keystone. Where's it? There's Keystone, the dotted line. But we got all these other ones going, another dotted line, proposed pipelines, and most of it's coming out of the tar sands and going all over the world. Okay, there's even more older kind of pipelines. Right. There's pipelines all over the place. Okay, Paris, 2015, as Paul mentioned, Indigenous people asked to be invited to the table of COP21. We're only allowed to send a written message. We're not allowed to sit in negotiations. So what do the people do? We don't need permission to speak up. They won't let us sit at their table. We'll fill the streets outside of their building from all over the world and get the message out of the people. And as they had predicted and we understood, the COP21 proposals are nowhere near sufficient to bring about enough reduction in CO2 as needed. And so that is the message these folks from South America, Pacific Islands, U.S., Canada, were all bringing to Paris. There's another beautiful picture from that same event. And this is a transition into what I was going to talk about next. And how am I doing now?
45.
No, you're kidding. Okay, I'll wrap it up here. And what I'd like to have time for questions, but I am going to show a few of the gardens. Can I have 5 minutes, Paul? Is that okay? All right.
No time, I don't care.
Well, you know, these people, they might have babysitters. I got to be respectful of everybody. And you can leave anytime. That's okay. This little gal here was a student of mine a few years ago. Her mom was a student of mine 30 years ago. So it's just, that I haven't heard in my class remind me how old I was, but look at the beautiful sign. This is at a Idle No More event on the campus. And this takes us to the principle of what do we do. And first, you come to a realization that you don't own the earth. We belong to it, and that we're not the masters of the universe and should not be. And this is something all humans used to know at one time. And that principle, let me show you here. For 97.5% of the existence of Homo sapiens sapiens. Now, this is the time span that most anthropologists and paleontologists and all those related fields agree to. It's been about 200,000 years that our species has been at this particular state of existence. And when you look at it on a chart like that, horticulture comes in 12,500 years ago, so that's about 5% of our existence. And from 12,500 to 5,000, people were still living well in indigenous ways. You know, horticulture, in spite of what Daniel Quinn wrote and all that, did not spell the end for humanity. You know, indigenous methods of growing crops intertwined with natural crops. What now the non-native people have given the label permaculture was a sustainable method of growing food. You were doing no harm to the earth in that way. You know, when the corn and other seeds were introduced, people understood that this wasn't a way to take over the world or outdo Mother Nature. This was a gift that you treat with respect and you use it accordingly. Later on, people decided to plow up vast swaths of land and do monoculture, which is not sustainable. Okay, so where did the Assyrians and the Mesopotamians and all of those folks come in? That's that tiny 2.5% of our existence. What we feel is so normal to us because historians call everybody before that prehistoric, and in the social Darwinist mindset, demean and degrade and say they're worthless. That used to be normal. And fortunately for some peoples in isolated pockets of the world today, that where they're still in their homelands, the Kogi people and the others I mentioned, it's still normal. Okay. I'm going to have to skip on this. I'm going nuts. All right, that's okay. I wanted to just show you. Okay, one other picture here. If indigenous people, as a social Darwinist and colonialist apologist of the late 19th century, tried to make everybody believe, if they were living a hand-to-mouth, meager subsistence existence, why did they all make such big baskets? Okay, think about that. If you're going to go out and get a little handful of seeds for your day's labor, you don't make a big basket like that. Typically, in the old world, in the sustainable pre-colonialist world, you could fill a big basket like that, working together in a little group in a couple of hours. All different kinds of wild grains and seeds that used to cover our continent, Turtle Island. Okay, I'm gonna stop pretty soon, but here's our farm, and I'll just show you a few pictures and say like 2 words here and there. I know we're out of time, but we did tours. If you get in touch with me later, you know, throughout the summer, we do tours. This particular day we had a person from England, 3 people from France, and other people from the res, our neighbors, and a few family members all looking at the crops. There's blue corn on the left, yellow corn on Right, we do 32 different types of species, fruit, nuts, and vegetables, with the many, at least a dozen close by wild species intertwined. That's permaculture. Biodiversity, another key to life, key to health. Biodiversity, multiculture, that's a word you can use in farming too, you know, not just what you usually think of as multicultural studies. So, but multicultural living with all the species. That was the original way for most of our existence. Okay, and then a little bit more, the Three Sisters companion planting, an old indigenous technique, was way back into South America, tens of thousands of years ago, spread northward along with the seeds to other tribes. Corn, squash, and beans planted together. We do more than the Three Sisters. Sometimes we bring the sunflowers or several varieties of squash in. So this one's somebody else's farm, that's ours on the left. Everything interacts with each other reciprocally and provides assistance to each other. I can't go into all the details now, I'm way out of time, but there's just a few pictures to show you. Kale, dill, onions. Up there is catnip, which flowers abundantly. Any flowering wild plant's going to attract pollinators. So we've got all kinds of bees and hornets and flying insects of all kinds. It's not just honeybees, you know, that do the pollinating. Even flies carry pollen from one plant to another. And that increases your yields and the health of the plants. And there's so much I wish I had time to talk about. Hugelculture is another technique that conserves water and allows you to grow more in a smaller space. That's the last slide. Our friends and neighbors who, Shelley Fayette on the right there, tribal councilwoman of the Salish tribe at the Flathead Reservation, is starting. The last thing I was going to talk about is food sovereignty. What I'll say is it's a declaration of independence against the toxic commercial food market and all of that. And it's a declaration that we're in charge of our own health. What goes in our bodies, what we do with our bodies, all of that is connected to this concept of food sovereignty and teaching the younger people all the things that we know and teaching each other. Anybody who grows anything can teach somebody. And so, you know, when I started this, preparing this slideshow, I knew I was going to do this, going to bring too many things in to talk about in 45 minutes. But I'll thank you for your patience in listening to me up to this point, and I would gladly answer any questions that you might have right now. And I'm going to take a sip of water because I forgot how thirsty I was. I was talking so much. Okay, so any questions or comments or thoughts? Yes?
So in your gardening, are you trying to grow all those crops?
No. No, that would be many, many thousands of crops.
Well, not all of them, but are you not using, you're not using old world crops, you're trying to use new world crops?
I favor New World, all right, that's, you know, indigenous, I won't say the New World, but of the hemisphere, you know, and most, 60% of the species of vegetable foods consumed worldwide originated in the Americas with indigenous people. So that's plenty of variety right there. Over 155 different species, and then many, many subspecies. There's 3,800 subspecies of the potato developed by indigenous people in South America. So we have plenty of diversity just from what indigenous people developed in America. But I, would welcome certain other foods, like the kale. Where does that start in? Asia. Yeah, and sure. Okay, yes. I could.
Where do you get your seeds?
Oh, well, we save our seeds for one thing. We only use what they call heirloom seeds that came from before, the genetic engineering developed. We're not trusting any of those. And so there are seed companies that specialize in that. There's Native Seeds out of New Mexico there. Seed Savers is another big company for heirloom seeds. There's a lot of them, I don't know them all, but I can develop a list, because just from the ones I do know, and I'll post it on Learning Earthways blog. I've got a couple of them in the links on the right-hand side of the page there for you. Sorry I don't remember all the names, but Native Seeds has been going for a long time. There's another Native Seeds company now in New York, run by Iroquois, out of the Saani people. That's a new one. There's some Facebook pages too related to this as well. There's more information. All right, how are you doing? I could stay here all night. I know you guys got things to do and places to go and all that, so feel free if you do have to leave. How are we doing on time? I mean, just...
We're almost at an hour.
Huh?
Almost at an hour. Almost at 8:30.
8:30? Almost? Yeah, okay, so I will stay and talk. Okay, let's take another
What was the
question.
website you just mentioned? The website you just mentioned, what was that?
The Haudenosaunee one?
No, is it your website?
Oh, my webpage, it's called Learning Earthways, all one word, and it's on WordPress blog sites. Anyway, yeah, it's, I work so much with my job, man, teaching 3 classes a semester. I don't do the blog yet, but I try to check it and interact whenever I can. I'm 64 now, and I think about retiring more often. A lot of my friends are retired, and so I can see me doing a lot of that when I'm retired. But anyway, I welcome the interaction. All you students are very fortunate to have this time in your life when you can go to college and dwell and focus in the world of knowledge and ideas. Before you go off to work for the man, more narrowly directed, shall we say. And make the most of this precious time you have as a student, and take it as far as you can, make your development of your being be all that you can be, as the old cliche goes there. But it's not a bad cliche. There's some that I don't like, but that one's a pretty good. Be all you, and discover your possibilities and potential. Like that gal was saying, we don't know what the future holds. We know that we have power. And that's, I think, the biggest thing that people in the movement have been learning when they saw, what was that guy's name again?
Stephen Harper.
Harper fell in the fall. Right before that, during the summer, up at your neighbors up north here in Alberta, as they call it, their equivalent of the legislature there, had a major turnover in a lot of positions where the Liberals came into majority. You have another one in British Columbia declaring a moratorium on more pipelines going through there. Things are happening, we had the Keystone being blocked here. Things are going on down in Brazil. There's a big struggle, and they're trying to stop that dam, but they're also having tremendous releases of pollution into their rivers right now, and people can't fish. But the power of the movement increases. And I'll take one more question, and then, let everybody who has to go, and I'll just talk to whoever remains. I don't have any books to sell. I probably will next year, but not this year. Okay. All right. How you doing? Well, thank you. Thank you very much for letting me be the